Yeah, it's picking up well.
Cool. Okay, so I'm Carl Knights, and I'm here. I do a lot of mental health work, mental health activism, I suppose. As I was detained in my first year at university, I'm in my third year now, but I was detained under the Mental Health Act, which was so fun. But yeah, so since then I've done a lot of media work about it, and I talk about it a lot. I do a lot of work in the uni for that. So yeah, so that's why I'm here.
I'm Phoebe Leonakis, and I'm president of UKC Student Minds, and I'm here to talk about the difference in the presentation of symptoms with men with autism and women with autism.
My name is Tana Navaratnalingam, and I am a member of the UKC Mental Health Group, and I'm here because I'm here to share my personal experience on being a woman with a mental health condition.
Okay, I'm Deacon Joy Everingham. I'm a Methodist minister. I'm a chaplain here at UKC, and I'm here to talk about transgender issues and mental health around that, I think.
Yes.
Yes, I am. There we are.
Okay, brilliant. So overall, what is your general opinion on gender and mental health?
Should we do that in?
Yeah.
We can just jump into it. My general opinion on gender and mental health, it's a very, in terms of men and mental health, it's getting a lot of media attention at the moment, but in terms of mental health and gender more widely, and specifically in other minority groups, there's just so much work to be done and so much research to be done, and that there's a lot of question marks surrounding it in terms of statistics and what we know in terms of what groups are affected more, which groups are more likely to have mental health issues or not. So in terms of men and mental health, we're making good strides, but I think overall, gender and mental health, we need to do a bit more work.
I think the sort of socialisation and gender roles has a big impact on mental health in general, and what I'll be talking about is the presentation of symptoms of certain mental disorders or conditions due to these factors.
Well, I'll be basing it more on my personal experience, but as a woman with a mental health condition. But yeah, that's it really.
Okay. Well, generally, so I've seen, because I'm transgender, so I've seen it from both sides of the gender, if you know what I mean. It's both sides of the binary and in the middle as well. So as I transitioned, and how men can express themselves is very different to how women socially are allowed to express themselves, and I think that affects men's mental health. But I think it affects women's mental health in different ways as well.
Do you think gender and the socialisation of gender has had an impact on your own mental health, and if so, in what way?
Absolutely. I think the socialisation of gender had a huge impact on my own mental health experiences, in that I started to suffer from depression when I was 14, and it wasn't until I was at university that I finally got help. And I think a large part of that is that men specifically are very reluctant to seek help. There's that idea, that sort of toxic masculine idea of masculinity is synonymous with being unemotional and hardening up, or whatever you want to call it. So I very much used to buy into that idea a lot. Luckily I got rid of it, and then I figured out that it was just silly and not worth the trouble that it was causing me. But it had a huge impact on me, because it kept me away from mental health services and medication and things like that for far too long. And with a particularly virulent depressive illness, the danger is that if it goes untreated, your episodes will get longer and they'll increase in severity and duration, and they'll happen more if you're untreated. So it's a very dangerous illness across the board to not treat. So yeah, it had a huge impact on me in that way.
I would say that it had an impact in the sense of again with the more socialisation aspect of things. So when I was diagnosed with autism, I was sort of seen to have to make an effort, if that's what, you know, some of the people said. You have to make an effort to talk to people. You have to make an effort to make friends. If you're not doing those things and you still don't have friends, that's because you're not trying hard enough. Whereas I've known sort of guys that may have the same condition that were not pushed to make an effort or try hard enough just because of the way, I don't know if it's in this particular community I was living in or the people I was surrounding, but it was sort of seen as women are more, you know, social creatures. It's more of a sorority. You've got to sort of interact in that way, and I always felt pressure to do that, and if I didn't do that, it was sort of a bad thing. I've done wrong. I'm bringing this loneliness and this depression upon myself, sort of thing. So that's my experience that I've had with that.
For me, it's been more of, so it's when every time I kind of like say, you know, I'm going through a depressive episode, I've always had the thing of, oh, but it must be because you're near your period, and it must be because it's near that time of month, and that's the sort of kind of, I guess, the socialisation of being a woman and having a mental health problem. That's what I've experienced. It's always been, oh, it's because you're near your period, and it's been like that sort of excuse. They don't want to admit that, you know, it is. I'm genuinely feeling depressed, and this is just like how I feel. It's not related to any sort of thing, so they were always related to that, and that was literally it. But yeah.
Right, well, I think for me, the social aspect of it was being forced to fit into a gender that I didn't fit into. And, you know, being told to man up and to be treated in a way that people just didn't see the real me. So it was, I was an oddity or a freak or whatever. And people, you know, verbalised that growing up through school and even in later years. But yeah, so, you know, that's not going to help anybody's mental health, really. So yeah, it's not a good story, but a good story too.
Do you think gender impacted how people viewed you when you discussed your own mental health?
I think a little bit, not a great deal. I think it was more, it affected the way my mental health was viewed before I sought help and before I really, I think it affected me more before I sought help, in that my friends were very much, and I was very much in denial that there was nothing going on, I was absolutely fine. You know, very much putting up that masculine front that you were sort of taught as a child, really, of, you know, the first thing you're told is don't cry, or don't do this, or don't do that. So I think it affected me more, the socialisation aspect of it affected me more before I sought help, and then once I did seek help, that masculine idea just fell apart. It just couldn't exist anymore. It just was revealed as a silly gesture that just wasn't worth the amount of effort that I was putting into it, I think. So it's more sort of beforehand, I think, for me.
For me, part of it comes down to when I was discussing about having bipolar and telling people about that. And a lot of the time, so it was kind of similar to what you were saying, Tana, about, oh, you need a period. But I had comments like, oh, are you hysterical? And things like that. You're just crazy, just another woman that's up there. Like, oh, I had the question, do you become a bunny boiler? Do you get obsessed with men if they break up with you? That was one question I had. I was like, I didn't even say anything like that, so I don't know how else to leave it, the answer is no. But yeah, it's the automatic assumption sort of that you have with women with these sort of certain conditions that we sort of can't control ourselves, you know, the typical hysterical female, the trope or stereotype, and at times my symptoms presented themselves in a way that will kind of adhere to those things, but it doesn't mean that's who I am. And I had trouble sort of separating how the illness was presenting itself at the time from who I am, and people just labelling that illness as me.
Well, I think it was, like Cole said, it was more of beforehand, you know, the whole kind of, before they knew about the fact that I just talked about my mental health, they kind of like guessed it based on like my period, or guessed it based on, oh, you know, I'm just really hormonal, etc. But once I started talking about it, it didn't really count on gender. They didn't really care about gender too much. It was actually more about culturally. They talked about like, oh, because I guess in my culture, they don't really talk about mental health too much. So it was kind of like a taboo subject almost. So it was a bit of a shock in that case when I talked about my mental health. But it wasn't, yeah, it didn't really depend on gender as such.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting, really interesting question, actually, because, again, seeing it from both sides, but actually, being transgender, if I go to the doctors now and say, I'm feeling depressed, you know, can I have some medication or whatever, they'll go, oh, you need to see a specialist because you're transgender. And I'm like, well, no, I'm just a little bit depressed. You know, I can feel myself slipping because I know what, you know, what it feels like from the past. But I can't access, you know, simple healthcare because, you need to go and see a specialist because we don't know how to deal with that. And you go, oh, that's nothing to do with being trans, you know, it's that's actually just being, you know, stress in real life. But yeah, that's, but, and seeing it from the other side as well, because people say to me now, you know, oh, you're just hormonal, you know, it's just hormones affecting you now, and I'm going, well, no, it's felt that before, you know, but, you know, that's, yeah, people like to dismiss, I think, your actual experience rather than actually deal with it, because it's something that they might experience as well, and they probably don't want to. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Have you ever been disbelieved or doubted in a way that you think may have been due to your gender or the stereotype that come between them?
Not necessarily disbelieved or doubted. It was more like when, say, it became particularly acute and very obvious. When I came out of hospital and I returned to university in my first year, a lot of people, men, came up to me and said, oh, did you not pull your socks up enough, or were you not man enough to not have that problem, or something like that, stuff along those lines. So it was more, there was no sort of disbelief as such beforehand, but a lot afterwards, after I came back to uni and I was pretty much very well in myself, that it became sort of abundantly clear what people's views of hospitalisation, and men in particular, were, as people were constantly coming up to me and saying, did you not have the willpower to get over it, or something like that, which is incredibly daft as a viewpoint. But yeah, it was really common for whatever reason, I guess, because masculinity is a very pervasive thing. So it was more like that for me, I think.
For me, it was more of the straight up, I don't believe you have this disorder, was one of the comments. It was not in relation to bipolar. I've actually only had these comments from people due to autism. And I'm not going to say 100% it's just because I'm a woman they're saying this. I think it's because of the way autism presents differently in women, and specifically in me as an individual person. But they would say things like, no, you don't have autism. No, you have to be making it up, don't you? And I was like, well, I think I and, psychiatrists have agreed over many years that I in fact do have autism. So, yeah, it was, I think because of that, because of the manifestation or presentation of the symptoms rather than me actually being a woman. But I think, again, it circles back to socialisation and gender roles as to why autism presents differently in men and women in the first place, which I'll go into a bit later in the panel.
Repeat the questions, I was kind of like...
I said, have you ever been disbelieved or doubted in a way that you think may have been due to your gender and the stereotypes that come with gender?
Not really, no. No, I haven't been doubted. I've only been doubted beforehand, before I was like talking about my mental health. But like after I started talking about my mental health, they kind of started believing it, and they're like, okay, this makes sense. Apart from culturally, which is a different aspect, in terms of gender, they kind of just, yeah, they kind of understood a bit more. Yeah, this is the case. And I accepted it.
Okay. I don't think because of my gender, but people have, said. I tend to put a brave face on things. So if I'm out in public, I'll smile and be bubbly, and people go, oh, she's not really depressed. But at home, I can, the anxiety kicks in, and but so people's like can't quite believe that I am, and they're just like, well, you're making it up just to get a bit of attention, or and they're like, no, I'm really not. But yeah, I don't think it's anything to do with gender. I think it's just people don't want to believe it. Yeah.
Okay. Have there been any situations where you felt uncomfortable to talk about your mental health because of your gender?
I think not overall. I think really the only settings that I've been uncomfortable is, say, if it's a particularly all-male environment, I'll be very, very uncomfortable. Like, say, the stereotype is men are always in the pub, right? So, let's say, I can vividly remember the first summer after my hospitalisation. I live in a tiny village, and like social hub is the pub for some reason. And I went in there and they said, oh, what have you been up to? And because I'd done a lot of media work and been very upfront about what my experiences were, they all knew. And they were asking about it, and then there was people in there who were more sort of standoffish, and it was like almost like an arena to sort of prove yourself, which was very disturbing, very peculiar. But other than that, people have been enormously receptive to it. They've been amazing about it, really, I think, because I articulated it in a certain way in writing and in media appearances and things like that, that it seemed legitimate, I think.
I think generally people have no problem talking about like my mental illness or certain like autism. I've just been a very open person. I sort of naturally have been, which would again go against the stereotype of being a very closed off, unemotional person. That's completely not me. But there was one incident, and I encountered this person down in Canterbury. I'm not sure if they were another student, but again, I think this has to do a little bit with being a woman. But he went up, and I was talking to him on a night out, and the conversation got to a point where I was very nervous going forward with it. And then he asked me why I was so nervous, and I told him because I'm autistic. And then he turned around and said, "You're too pretty to be autistic." That was his putting into the conversation. And I don't know where he would get these things from. It's quite a sort of ableist ideal that your sort of outside characteristics need to correspond. If you've got a disability, or you can't be attractive, or if you're a girl, you've got autism, or what do autistic people look like? I said to him, what do we look like? Tell me. And he could not answer that question. So yeah, that's a time I've had feeling uncomfortable talking about things, and I just related that to gender, because I don't think he would say to a man, "Oh, you're too handsome," or something like that.
I had a problem beforehand talking about my mental health, simply because I felt kind of really nervous talking about it, and could kind of just hide it away. But then I think, again, this is more connected to culturally rather than being based on my gender. So it's more like the cultural taboo sort of thing, and kind of like being scared to talk about it in case I get judged within my own background. But in terms of gender, I haven't had a problem. And when I started talking about my mental health, everyone was like really happy that I was talking about it, and like they were actually like really like happily responsive to it, which was really good. So yeah.
Well, I think this has changed over the years, actually, because when growing up in the 70s and 80s, makes me look really old, and I am really old. Yeah, things weren't really talked about at all then, you know. You just got on with it, and especially if you're a boy, you just got on with it. But I think as, you know, the 90s and now, things have changed and people are willing to talk about it a lot more. But I think people actually get bored with it quickly, you know, because depression takes a long time to either work through or, you know, and sometimes will never, you were saying, you know, if it's left untreated for long enough, it becomes longer and longer and longer. And people just go, well, I just can't be bothered with that anymore, you know. You get on with it and I'll see you when you're better, you know. It's madness, really.
So I don't know about what you're saying for this, Joy, but I'm going to ask, what is your experience of the university and your mental health been? Has it been positive? Have people been supportive?
Yes, I'd say yes, absolutely, in that they were supportive before I went into hospital, and when I was very reluctant to get any treatment at all. They were very supportive, and I guess the missing link was that I didn't, at that point I was so sort of immersed in masculinity, or the ideal of it, that I just would not accept help regardless of who offered it. So the university was brilliant. They offered a myriad of things to me, but I was just completely unreceptive, just did not want any of it. And then when push came to shove and I was detained and in hospital for a while, and then I came back to uni, they were brilliant. It was a phased return. It was absolutely completely smooth. They assured me all the work that I missed would be fine. It would all be covered by a concession. It was like everything was in hand, and it was very much, I had the impression that this wasn't their first time doing something like this. They were very experienced with it, which I was enormously glad of. So yeah, really, I think looking back on it, they offered a great deal. I just wouldn't accept it at the time. But they are, for me personally, yes, they've been imperfect and some bits could be improved. But on the whole, they've been great with me, I think.
I completely agree with everything you said, and in fact I will compare the university to the outside mental health teams who have completely and utterly failed me.
Yeah, they're
since
not known for their greatness.
No, this has actually been the only time I have ever got proper support for my mental health, has been through this university. If I hadn't have come here, I never would have got sort of proper therapy, despite having so many things happen that would warrant therapy for me to have. But apparently, because I've got bipolar, that just warrants, you know, pills, and that's it. Whereas I was misdiagnosed with another condition at one point, and then they did offer me therapy because that one's treated with therapy apparently. But yeah, at this university, I've had tremendous support, and as well from the law school has this wonderful guidance counsellor called Hattie. She's brilliant. I've had concessions. I've been suicidal at points, and I've gone in there and they've talked to them, they've helped me through it. I've had counselling through the uni. There's been times where I've nearly actually dropped out. I barely made it through first year and second year. Second year was worse. I was living with somebody who was being incredibly emotionally and psychologically abusive to me. And if it wasn't for the university, I wouldn't have been able to get out of that situation and away from that person. I wouldn't have been able to do all my exams. I managed to get 3 firsts in those exams because of support I got from my mental health through the law school and that one specific guidance counsellor. So yeah, I cannot fault it, it's been brilliant, and I actually worry about when I'm not at university to do getting support for my mental health.
I unfortunately haven't experienced as good experience as you guys have felt, which is a bit unfortunate really, but so the medical centre is amazing, and that's where things really stepped up, because I got the support I needed, both from psychology therapies and both from the medical centre itself, and the doctors there. However, the school that I'm part of unfortunately haven't been helpful, and in fact have been quite the opposites in terms of the way the staff have treated me with my mental health condition. So unfortunately, it was an incident that occurred with one of the lab supervisors where I think not knowingly that I had a mental health condition said something quite, I won't repeat it, but it was pretty serious in terms of like suicidal intent, and it was a shock to get that in the middle of a lab session, you know. And I was like, okay, that's not right. I had to complain, and I was like, and that took a lot of persuasion from my friends to complain, because I was like, I don't know if I should complain or not, whether if this gets thrown back at me. I was a bit worried myself. So when I did find the courage to complain, I felt like it was just a complete waste of time, because I went to complain and all I got back is, we'll give them training, and that was it. And that was literally it in the following session from them. So I was like, I'm not letting this leave the case. I went to the student union, who were absolutely amazing, and they helped me, because they said to me, right, so this is the way, the process you can do a student complaint, and I put a student complaint forward. It then, went back to the school, but it went further up in the scale, and then my professor, who's now part of is the person who's looking after the labs basically, he basically sorted it out, and it's a lot better now. But it was a very tough situation. Unfortunately, it made me trust the school less, and like I find it difficult to be able to get concessions or anything of the sort. So I try and attend as much things as possible, even in my worst stage, which isn't the best thing to do at all. But I do it because I don't want to get a concession, because I know it's going to be taking ages or it may never happen. And I've heard from people who are quite close to me, my close friends and stuff, that even they've had a hard time getting concessions as well, based on similar things from the same school. And it's just really unfortunate that, I know you guys must be a part of like amazing schools, it's just unfortunate my school isn't the same. So, yeah.
Do you think that's why you find it very helpful being a member of the mental health group?
Yeah, it is absolutely fantastic. It's my way of kind of like being able to like talk properly and kind of open up and kind of not feel judged like I feel judged in my own school, because that's basically what happened. I felt really judged. So yeah, the mental health group makes that look better for me.
And that's part of why I founded Student Minds, where I was getting the support in the school, but I hadn't made friends at all. And I was thinking I needed to find that from the peers in university rather than just from the staff. So yeah, and then I found that you guys existed, and now we're partners, so it's great.
Yeah.
Do you know if they followed through on the training? On training the staff?
No. All they literally said is in the following meeting, they're like, well, what we've done is we've given them training, and that's all we can do.
Oh.
And then I had to go and chase it up further with my professor, and he's gone, well, I never knew about this. And he should have known about it, because he was the professor for that lab before as well. So he was like, well, I never knew about this. And I was like, oh, that's good to hear. So he was like, well, now I need to tell his manager, and I need to tell his manager. And then I was like, okay, as long as like it gets to the right path and it actually happens this time, I'm happy. And it did. So, it did get somewhere finally, but it makes me trust them less. And like I find it, I mean, it may be a good idea to get concession at times, like when I really do need it. But I know it's not good, but I just go to the lectures even if it's like really difficult for me, because I'm kind of scared to get concessions in case I don't get it. Yeah, it's just the trust is gone. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Yeah, I can't really talk about that from as being a student, but I'm thinking about trans students in the non-binary students in the university. Unfortunately, until yeah, about 2.5 years ago, and there wasn't really no support for trans students here. The university medical practice didn't really know what they were doing. None of the staff really knew what they were doing. EDI really wanted to do something, but they didn't know what. So I helped work with the university and a trans charity that's based in Ashford, called TG Pals and myself, a sport group, mainly for what it is for trans students and their spouse or significant others. And that, I think, has worked really well. I can't say from their point of view, but I can say from my point of view, I see good things happen.
So this is specifically for you, Joy. How did your struggle, if you struggled with your gender identity, how did this impact your mental health?
It was awful. Actually, yeah. I mean, from a very, very young age, I was, 5 or 6 years old when I realised I was different. I was sort of going to school and being in very gendered spaces. Because boys did this, girls did this, and I didn't really fit in either of those places. I wasn't really like the boys, but I knew, physically I wasn't like the girls. So I was in this strange little in-between place, which, is quite a lonely place to be, as you can imagine. Anybody who's on the outside. And I socialised the best I could with my peer groups, but yeah, I never really fitted in either camp. So I was a very emotional child, huge mood swings, and I was just seen as a problem rather than there was anything mental health related. I thought I was the only one in the world, because back then, there was no internet, you couldn't find all these things out, and the only trans people were people who were laughed at well, they weren't even trans people, but gay men who dressed up as women or pantomime dames. I think that was the nearest thing that you could think of, which is not trans at all. And I think that sort of it's been pervasive through my life, really. I mean, I didn't come out until I was in my late 20s, when I got the internet and realised it was an actual thing. And I wasn't alone, but the stress is unimaginable, actually. And people there's this trans narrative that says, you were born in the wrong body. And I've never really felt that. I quite like my body. It's served me quite well over the last 40 odd years. But what has really affected my mental health is how people perceive me. So I knew inside I was female, but nobody saw that. Nobody saw me, and that's an awful place to be, actually. And it's only been in the last few years since I transitioned that people do see me and call me, she and her, and see me as a woman and treat me as a woman. That's changed, and my mental health is far better than it used to be. And now I've seen it with other people as well. Supporting trans people over the last few years. And there was a study done, actually, I'm just going to be a bit boring now, but there was a study done in 2014 about mental health and trans people. And 73% of trans people self-harm, which is horrendous. But after they transitioned, only 3% continue to self-harm. Which is, that says something about the mental stress involved. Again, like 84% of people think about suicide, trans people think about suicide. And again, afterwards, it's only 3%. And that's usually down to people treating them badly, or they don't pass in society as male or female, that people still have those feelings. So it is a huge mental strain just to be alive. The anxiety involved is ridiculous. And even through the transition, the anxiety is ridiculous, because you know, you look a bit silly sometimes, and people tend to shout at you in the street, and that doesn't help you really. But yeah, once you've gone through that transition process, it's a lot better, I have to say.
So Phoebe, how does, and so I know your dad is autistic as well, yeah.
Yeah.
How does it affect you differently than it does for him?
So I'll start off by saying that me and my dad both have Asperger's syndrome, and we're actually within a 1 point disparity of each other on the scale. So he's at 37 and I'm actually at 38. But within my dad's life, it has, you know, cost him a lot of problems with other people, such as employers reacting badly to his autism when they're talking about how he is unable to sort of integrate properly into a team dynamic. And I think with the socialisation aspect of that, like men are not necessarily in that way, but there is that sort of team camaraderie when it comes to sports and, you know, stuff like that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to sort of the office dynamics, it was like when he was young, he wasn't really encouraged as I was, you know, to make an effort and to participate in the way things were. It's caused him problems in his relationships as well, such as with my mum. Like, he and my mum were divorced, but he didn't actually know about having autism until quite recently, even though it's been very obvious, like pretty much his entire life, and always to me. When I was diagnosed, I could see that my dad exhibited the same, if not far greater, symptoms than what I did. But I don't. It's just that he never, because of his age, I believe, back then it generally wasn't diagnosed a lot. More traditional sort of, well, I suppose this is different. It's more social and high functioning autism. But when you like I don't know what to call, say, the just regular autism was diagnosed more prevalently than Asperger's because it's high functioning, you can sort of get through life in that respect. I was actually looking at something that was talking about diagnosis of autism, specifically Asperger's, and it's generally a 4-to-1, 5-to-1 basis to men being diagnosed much more than women. And there's even a 15-to-1 sort of Asperger's, and some people thought it didn't exist at all in women. And I think the reason for that is I've got from the National Autistic Society. I talked about masking symptoms. So there's a woman called Rose Hughes who wrote an article for the National Autistic Society, and she said about how hiding her autism, and she's a master of disguise, how she wears a mask. And I'm pretty much the same way, that I've always been told you show up no matter what happens, you go out, you put on a show, you just demonstrate to people that you're capable, but all that sort of thing. And as I said, I was encouraged to interact socially more often, was pushed, you know, make friends, but not by my dad because he didn't really think about any of these sort of things. Like, it was different people, that teachers, sometimes my mum, that she is a brilliant mum, but was saying about how to make friends, but she's helped me a lot. And because I had my mum being there and saying to me, you know, this is how we used to sit down for hours and practice like conversations, how to talk to people. And my dad never had anything input like that. Schools were very different back then. I've got lots of help at university with like the exams. He never had anything like that. Just the lack of diagnosis and the fact those facilities didn't exist back in the 1980s sort of time when he was going. So yeah, I also read that girls are subject to greater social expectations, which links to the interacting more socially, like quite directly to that. And it's sort of being the perfect woman, if so. So the man's got to be masculine and strong, and the woman has got to be sort of prim, proper, perfect. Composed is probably the word to use, and to talk to people, not to sit in a corner and read a book, sort of thing, which is something my dad might do in a social situation. He would admit that he does this, and wouldn't mind me saying So many times I've wanted to do that, but I just felt that extra pressure. I can't do that because then what people say, that sort of thing. And I wanted the freedom to be able to do that. And I thought, well, I don't know if it's because I'm a woman that I feel I can't go in there and just read a book because they eat that sort of thing. And then this is just the main points, having more active imagination, engaging in pretend play. That's always in my room. I'm an only child, so by myself was just always the way I was playing, hours and hours on end. I did not come out of there. And another thing with people with autism is we have special interests, which one of mine is pandas, and it goes so far as I have a tattoo and 58 panda teddies now in my room. But it's masked in girls because we have interests similar to other girls, such as playing with Barbies. I had hundreds of them that I'd collected when I was a kid. Or pandas, animals, just like things like that. Whereas a guy's autism might be more like you get to see it because he has an interest which is not necessarily the same as other boys may have, and then people will say, oh, he's obsessed with that. Whereas you could say, well, she just really likes pandas, she's not obsessed with it. That sort of thing. So yeah, because of another theory I heard about control theory as well. So somebody that can control a condition or a mental illness is given more sympathy by other people in society. They're thinking, oh, but someone who can't control themselves or their symptoms are really showing at that point, they're given far less sympathy and sort of, I get compliments. I don't know if I should take it as a compliment. You know, you've never known you're autistic, sort of thing.
Backhanded.
Yeah, you're not really sure if it's invalidating or it's not, but it's one of those ones where I think, well, they don't necessarily know what they mean, so I'm just going to take it as a compliment. But yeah, the control theory, it's when it comes to men with autism, because they can't necessarily like put this like mask on, this disguise, like they're given sometimes less sympathy, such as I've not had problems with, you know, an employer or like things generally within the university or things like that, but I know my dad has, and that's probably because of the symptoms appearing on him more than they do me, despite the fact I'm actually 1 point higher on the scale than he is. It's all about the manifestation and presentation of the symptoms, I think.
Okay, well, there were meant to be 2 men here, so...
Okay, this one's for me.
It's argued in some places that mental health is worse for men as a whole, and there's been a lot of discussion around this. Do you think this has benefited you personally?
I don't know, that's hard to say. I agree to a degree in that, yes, it has received an enormous amount of attention in the past year or year and a half. Sorry, could you repeat that?
You said mental health is worse for men as a whole, and there's been a lot of discussion.
Yeah.
Has it benefited you?
Yeah, I think it has, in that the conversation has been opened up on a wider sort of societal level. Like I say, I remember particularly when Professor Green started doing a lot of mental health work. He did a documentary called Suicide in Me about his father's suicide. And that opened up, that got a lot of media attention when it aired, and he's continued to do sort of work around men's mental health specifically. And it has gained a lot of momentum, I think, which is good. But I think it is the statistics for men's mental health are very, very concerning. Like say the #1 killer of men under 45 in the UK is suicide, and that's a public health issue. That's an epidemic that isn't being treated as such. It's sort of being swept under the rug on a sort of government level in terms of funding and whatnot. So I think the stats are very concerning. What's more concerning is that when Calm did a study, I think in 2014, they found that only 25% of the population of the UK knew that suicide was the biggest killer of men. And that is just enormously worrying. But I'd like to think that the statistic would be different now if they did the study this year. It would be slightly different, I hope. But in terms of has that conversation benefited me, I think it has. In that because it was in the papers, there was a lot of news coverage on it, particularly around celebrities. It made my experiences that much easier to talk about. It was just generally made a bit easier. Whereas, say, if I had these experiences maybe 10 years previously or something, if I'd been born a bit earlier, it might have been more difficult to open up that conversation because it wouldn't have been there to start with. So I'm quite fortunate in that sense, in that having the conversation there at a wider societal level benefited me enormously, I think.
So now this is for everyone. So I said the focus of men's mental health has been argued that now the mental health of women and non-binary people and trans people has been neglected. What do you think about this?
I agree. I absolutely agree. And I was going to say, while men's mental health has received a lot of spotlight, even when the coverage was going on, I was concerned that any time any issue gets spotlight, you're throwing a lot of things into the dark. And it just makes me incredibly uncomfortable. I just don't really particularly like that aspect of it. But even as all the news coverage was focusing on men's mental health, the Mind Media Awards that year was focusing on men's mental health, I was concerned, and I still am, that a lot of experiences from other populations just weren't being addressed, and other crises were developing as one of them was being addressed. And that's still a concern. I think other crises are developing in particularly, as mentioned before, in LGBT plus populations and in a lot of other minority groups. There's crises going on that are sort of being neglected, and it's very concerning for me, anyway.
Yes, I do agree with quite a lot of what you said, Carl. And when you're talking about the other minority groups that may have been affected and sort of they're not getting necessarily the coverage or the help, I noticed when I was going to the community mental health team quite a while back, at the time we could comment on this, there was these leaflets specifically targeted at Asian women who were going to the service because in the community it was very difficult for them because of culture, not necessarily because of the gender issues, to come out and seek help. And there was a helpline on there, but that was only in that one particular community mental health place I went, and so we can see that that is a problem. But since I've been stopped going to that one particular place, I've never seen it again. So I can tell that is a problem. I think more attention should be brought to that. But I also think that it is incredibly important to still bring attention to something we know is a massive issue, especially considering the suicide rates and things like that. And it's very hard to give things equal attention, isn't it, when there's so many issues.
Really tough,
one thing gets spotlight for a bit and then something else gets neglected, and it's really difficult to sort of allocate time. But I think we just need to have more people out there bringing awareness to as many different issues as possible. Just keep campaigning, keep doing that.
Yeah, definitely. I think to sort of build on that, it's just really unfortunate that all these sort of crises or a wider crisis of mental health, much more widely across a lot of groups, has all happened at once. And it's horrendous. I mean, it's just really unprecedented. There's been a lot of longitudinal studies of where data is collected over decades, and about how many mental health conditions are diagnosed across the board in everybody. And the general trend is sort of consistent, and then it skyrockets upwards in the last 10 years or so. So it is just really concerning. It is unprecedented. We haven't had anything like it in our sort of social history, I don't think. So yeah, it's just really unfortunate, I think, that it's all happening at once. So that it's really difficult.
Do you think the reason for the more diagnosis is because the more awareness has been brought on how to recognise things, and because we're more aware of it now, more diagnosis being made?
I think it's a very complicated picture in that there is that aspect to it, in that we are better at diagnosing things. But in particular, there's been an increase in mental health conditions in young people especially. I can remember seeing Mind released a study last year, I think, where something like 75% of mental health conditions come on or they develop and first present themselves in the teenage years, and that's something like almost a modern development. So there's a wider questions of, okay, what do the health services look like? What society is everyone in? Is it beneficial to them? Is it detrimental to them? Are government policies beneficial or not? And it's really complicated, and there's a lot going on. We are definitely better at diagnosing things, and that's great, but I think it's unfortunate that as this crisis has developed, that, say for instance, mental health funding is continually cut, health funding is cut across the board. So it's almost like the services can't meet the demand of a crisis or an epidemic going on.
It's like recently I wanted to go and get my medication increased, but they can't do it at the GP. So I said, oh, can you just refer me back to psychiatrist? As where I live in London, I'm sort of split between two different places. And then they said no, but they've looked at my file and they've decided to not see me down at the community mental health team. So I don't know how I'm going to get my medication increased, but apparently the GP can't do that. So see what you mean by the cuts. It's definitely something to do with
you
that.
You can feel it on the ground, definitely. But, yeah. What do you want to
Yeah, so I think definitely that since the focus on mental health, on men's mental health has kind of like increased a lot more over the past year or so, it's kind of like thrown a shadow on other demographics, mental health, and it's bad. Like, again, like Phoebe said, you can't give equal share to everyone, but it is worth definitely reminding people that it's not only one demographic that's suffering with it, it's everyone, and everyone should get their part and can be reminded.
I think it is good to focus on, specific things at certain times, because it is, as you say, an epidemic, it is. And if you don't sort of catch that early, then it's just going to get worse. But I think it's sort of part of society, and we ought to do. I'm sure there are studies going on as to why. There's lots of people say it's like social media has been a factor, or I'm not sure. I mean, I couldn't speculate on that, but there definitely needs to be more research on that. But I mean, and for non-binary people, I mean, I can't really speak for non-binary people because I'm not. Well, I don't fit the binary, I suppose. But I think that needs to have a focus, because if people don't recognise that, so I talked about me not being recognised as a woman, if they're not recognised as their gender, then that's going to have horrendous mental stresses as well. So I think that needs to be talked about and not vilified in the press, which is being doing at the moment. So let's be nice to people for a change.
Right, this is my last question. If we lived in a genderless or an equal society, do you think mental health problems would decrease? I know it's my favourite question.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'd like to think they would decrease, but I wouldn't say with any certainty that they would. I mean, I think a lot of, particularly amongst my friends at least, who I see going through mental health services at the minute, they mention that it's not as such gender for them, it's more their mental health is deteriorating due to their local mental health trust or their local health services having no funding and working on a shoestring and seeing people in 4 months' time after they see you the first time and all that kind of stuff. So I think I point the finger at other things. Gender's a huge part of what's going on, there's no doubt, but I'm sort of more grumpy with funding and cuts and the effect that that's having on people. So I think if we had a genderless society but it's the same government, I'd still be a bit grumpy. And I still think it's a lot of my friends, as I say, have mentioned that that's more detrimental to their health, that waiting period. Like, say, I have a friend who doesn't mind being mentioned, I won't name names, but she had a psychotic break. It's a complete detachment from reality. And she waited, I think, about 4 or 5 months to see someone. And within that 4 or 5 months, it was the worst mental health that she'd ever had. And that was just because her local NHS, or the NHS more widely, and her mental health trust had its funding cut, and it just couldn't operate to the best of its ability. So I think I'd point the finger at that more than, even if it was a genderless society, I'd point the finger at that. But I don't know, that's just me.
I think I point a very big finger at that as well. And from my own personal experience, going on for years now,
Yeah.
and just completely, basically useless. The mental health team is, you don't see them, or they don't give you the right help. They don't listen when they're writing things down. You get a letter about what you've apparently told them.
Yeah, it's completely inaccurate.
I'm just like, oh, so we sat here for an hour, and what information did you retain, sir? Basically. And one of my friends has been going through something, and it's heavily suspected they have BPD, and they've been expressing that they've been suicidal and they have self-harmed and a lot of things going on. And again, 4 months. So it's February at the moment, they're expected to go see someone. This was a while back when they were given that appointment.
Yeah.
And they weren't even given like an initial face-to-face appointment that you have when you first go there. Telephone now.
Everything's telephone or Skype at best.
Yeah. And even a few years ago, we're talking back in 2013, even then you still got to see someone face-to-face. Now it's totally different.
It's degraded to such a degree.
No, it's telephone first, and then you'll see someone face to face.
But the sort of genderless society, I think their gender does cause a hell of a lot of problems when it comes to worsening of mental health. But, and you mentioned equal, is that more of a term for like social class as well? Sort of, if everybody... I think that is a big problem. So money, like people that are living in deprivation, their mental health is definitely going to be a lot worse. And it obviously is saying if somebody's middle class doesn't mean they're going to be mentally well, but if you're living in those conditions, you're likely to get depressed about the fact you're living in those conditions, and then it worsens to a full depressive illness in itself. I mean, there's many things to get depressed about or happen to any social class, but I think the more sort of deprivation you're living in, the worse your mental health is going to be in general. That is definitely an issue. And also it's biological factors as well. When I'm thinking about some mental illnesses are genetic, like a strong component of them are. So it starts to, my dad has autism, and there's lots of people with bipolar in my family, and I also have bipolar. So I think there would still be the existence of those conditions that are genetic going down as well, but I think they might be less severe in some cases because there may be less triggers, and stuff going on around gender could be a big trigger for the emergence of a mental illness earlier, for example, or say bullying, another thing, other sorts of things like abuse make mental illness come out earlier. So bipolar usually comes out between the ages of 19, I believe, like 24, but for me I was 12 when I had my first major episode. Was because of severe bullying every day and things like that. So I think those things are still going on. Then there's still going to be a lot of people with mental health issues. If there's still people being subjected to child abuse and things like that, there's still going to be a lot of people with PTSD and things like that going on. And I don't think it's impossible to completely eradicate the mental health problems altogether because of the social and genetic components, but I think it would decrease, but not to a huge extent.
It wouldn't disappear completely. Yeah, I agree.
So I completely agree with what Phoebe said, but with with the idea of having a genderless society, I think it would put away the pressures. Okay, I'll speak on behalf as a woman of the pressures from the media, because the pressures from the media do cause a lot of mental health problems to occur. So things like you've got to look skinny, you've got to be either a size 6 or a size 8, otherwise you're a plus size and that's it, you push. And like now we're back being accepting plus size and it's great, but how long have we not accepted that? And how long has mental health problems stemmed from that? You know, and things like the perfect look. It always seems to change, but there's the perfect look. Now it's from the perfect body look, the perfect face look, what fashion you wear. Fashion comes around again and again, but people follow it so intently sometimes. And if you don't follow it, you kind of, especially you get that, again, it starts from an early age, and you get that from, these days from primary school, but I remember from high school, it would be mufti day, and if you don't come along in the fashionable items, you're thrown into basically the trash or the garbage completely. And that, like, obviously makes you feel like unwanted, and then slowly mental health problems will occur from that. So I completely understand that it will decrease, but again, as Phoebe says, it will take a lot for it to decrease a lot, because there's a lot of things that mental health problems stem from.
Like materialism seems
Yeah.
to be a big
Yeah.
problem.
Definitely.
I
Yeah.
think, capitalism is I think one of the biggest contributors to that, actually, you know, because the media uses images to sell you things, and you know, you can look like this if you buy these products, and that's what it's aimed at. So it's about money and probably power as well. And we've turned into a country that doesn't really manufacture anything, so it is all retail. So everything is about selling more and more and more and more. I'm not going to go into socialism and capitalism, but you can probably understand where my political leanings lie. But I think that as you were saying earlier about equality, I'm not sure a genderless society would help, actually. I think people are gendered, and they need to understand what their gender is, you know, and it is more than two. There's more than male and female. There's, you know, it's a lot wider than that, and I think we should recognise that. But I don't think it should be genderless. I think it should be more equal from a class point of view. I think from what you were saying, there's the disparity between rich and poor is becoming bigger and bigger. And I just read a book called The Spirit Level. It's an amazing book, actually. And somebody's done lots of research onto the widening gaps in society. And actually mental health for the people who are in the top 1% of earners is worse. As soon as that gap gets bigger, the 1%ers, their mental health gets worse as well as the people who aren't, you know, who are living in poverty. So it actually is no good for anybody. Absolutely anybody. So you need a more equal society.
So nobody's winning.
Nobody's winning. Absolutely.
Yeah,
and it was like startling, you know, the evidence that you put forward. You should read it. It's amazing.
It's good, actually.
Is this sort of because, say the 1% is because of, to attain that new standard of wealth and living, they have to put on all these hours, and they're expected. I've heard some stories about people sleeping in offices in these like big, like investment firms, and I think maybe that's why, and like those sort of factors. But yeah, it seems nobody wins at all.
No, absolutely. And can you imagine the guilt? You know, because
I'm in this bracket.
Yeah,
Why am I in
absolutely.
this bracket?
If I've got all this, then somebody hasn't got it. You know, that's how money works. You know.
Yeah.
So you know the guilt that must go along with that. I don't know. Unless you're a sociopath, you've got to feel some sort of guilt there. I don't know. I'm not that. I'm not in the top 1%. But I don't wish to be either. There we go.